Hi, this is Rui Vizcaya. I'm responsible at Watchful Software for product development, and thank you for joining us on this webinar that will be dedicated on how you're able to collaborate in a secure fashion with what is typically known as the external users, leveraging Azure AD and Azure RMS and RightsWATCH. We have several people enrolled for this webinar, so let's just give it a couple more minutes for everyone to be able to log in. I think that you can see a big owl on your screen, which is the very first slide of a very short, I promise, very short slide deck that I've prepared for you. And at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session. So please do use the GoToWebinar tool on your right in order to type in the questions that you want answers to. And I'll address some of those questions at the end of this webinar. Just setting the stage while still we're waiting for a couple more people to join. The point of this webinar is not to give you a demonstration or a demo or a product walkthrough of RightsWATCH. This is a short 30 minutes presentation and talk on how you can leverage RightsWATCH in order to enhance the Azure AD and the Azure RMS experience to have a secure collaboration capabilities with those external users. And external users in the sense that they are unknown to your systems. Basically, they don't have a username and a password that is managed by you, your systems, or your company's systems, and that's why we leverage Azure AD. You are mutually from a central location, so you don't need to mute and unmute yourself. This is to provide the best experience possible in terms of the listening experience of this webinar. And don't worry, this webinar is being recorded, and you'll have access to it on demand at the front end of the watchfulsoftware.com website. So if you need to take some print screens or whatever, I mean, don't bother. You will have access to the full extent of the slides and the recording of this webinar, if not today, tomorrow on our website. And as I've said, the Q&A session will be at the end. So please, you're welcome to enter questions at any time using the Q&A feature on the GoToWebinar control panel. So without further ado, what we are to address today, and I promise just a couple of slides, not to extend 30 minutes, is to how to extend protection to external parties. And then basically here we'll talk about how does Azure AD work and how does Azure Trust Fabric capabilities work and what does that mean in real life. Then we'll talk a little bit about the RMS sharing application and how does it work to allow you to collaborate with those external users. And then we'll talk about what remains to be the external user's dilemma, and even if you're using, Azure AD, Azure RMS, and the sharing app, and what and how, better said, RightsWATCH addresses and leverages those capabilities in order to enhance them and to really allow policies to be applied when you're dealing with and exchanging information with those external users, being it via email, a cloud-based drive, a USB drive, or any other media that you use to exchange sensitive information with. I'll also give you a use case, just an example use case of why this makes sense, this approach makes sense, and then at the end we'll have the Q&A session. So starting from the beginning, as is commonly a good practice in this case, is understanding what is the Azure AD Trust Fabric infrastructure. And I'm reusing a Microsoft slide in order to really explain what this is. And I hope that I'm able to convey, not in details, not in the specifics, not in the bits and bytes of it, but overall, what does it mean to us all users inside companies in an enterprise world. So you have two companies, which is Company Y and Company Z, and they both have their own Active Directories on-prem. And what they do is they mirror those Active Directories into an Azure instance of that AD. It doesn't have to be the full AD replicated in the cloud, but it's basically a set of properties that need to be pushed into an Azure-based version of that Active Directory. And because it sits on Azure, it sits in the cloud, basically, by definition, it's automatically federated, I dare to say, with any other Azure ADs out there in the world. So Company Y and Company Z Active Directory on-prem are not federated, are not in somehow relationship with each other, but because they are replicated on the cloud, on Azure, by definition, by default, those users are, or those ADs are federated amongst themselves, I dare to say, and basically they can trust each other automatically just because they are out there. The sharing application is an app that Microsoft has released and is being developing. It's a very powerful and comprehensive app that sits on the ribbon of your Office application. In this case, as I'm showing you in this slide on your Word, it also sits at when you do a right-click, a shell extension, or a right-click. You can also have access to the sharing app via that. But the focus of this presentation has to do with the fact that I'm a user. I'm typing in on a Word document in this case, and I click that button there on top. That is the share protected button, which is what identifies the RMS sharing application. When I do click on it, a pop-up window appears to me, and as a user, I'm allowed to choose between a set of options that are presented to me. So basically, if I click on, if I go to the users, which is what I'm highlighting right now, you enter email addresses of the people that are to receive this document as an attachment to an email that is later then generated automatically. And then you choose what are known ad hoc rights of Azure RMS. So you allow the recipients of that email to have view-only capabilities on the document, or reviewing or co-authoring or co-ownership of the document that you are producing. And then you have a set of other enhanced capabilities that lets you to expire the documents by X, receive an email when someone tries to open these documents, or even do remote kill capabilities on these documents. So this is all native Azure RMS, and this is really interesting in the sense that you can, using native Azure RMS via experience via the sharing app, do the sharing of this document using ad hoc rights. Another option that you have using the share protected, if you scroll down, and if you can look here, I've scrolled down a little bit on this print screen, you can have access to Azure RMS templates. There are fewer options when you do that here in the bottom, but the bottom line is that once you choose to apply not an ad hoc right, but an Azure RMS template, basically you are shown with this pop-up here, which it's a default pop-up by Microsoft that tells you, look, if you're using a template, which is a company policy, you need to make sure that the recipient or the recipients are included in the policy template that you've selected, so that they can have access to it. So the difference being, when you're choosing ad hoc rights, the company doesn't need to allow those recipients in order to receive those. You decide, the sender decide, what policies to apply. When you choose templates, you need to be sure that the company is as on board, as provisioned those users on Active Directory, so that they are able to receive it. But let's assume that it's all done. What happens then is that an email is automatically generated that is unprotected in the body. So an email with a predefined header is created, and you can type in whatever you want. The email body will be unprotected to the recipient, in this case John Doe, and then two versions of that document are automatically attached to the email. One is, the docx version, which is the native doc application or file format, and PPDF or a P file file format that is a replica of this document, but in PDF format. The reason that you have two copies of the document, one in PDF format, the other one in doc, it's because from a recipient standpoint, you will be able to receive and consume this file in any other format, in any other system or device, depending on the application that you're running, the sharing app application that you're running, and depending on the device in itself, and being it RMS aware or not. The point here is that RightsWatch also enables you to have, ways to classify the body of the email and not just the attachments that are automatically attached to it. So this is an example of a multi-level security model classification scheme that was, decided to be applied by this company to its users. If you do all this, there's a fundamental dilemma that still resides, and that has to do with the fact that you, as a user, you need to be aware of the workflow to share the information and share that file with external users. So you need to be aware that there is a workflow, clicking on the sharing app on the ribbon in order to make it happen. Not only that, but you need to be knowledgeable of what types of information should be protected and what types of files and information inside your company do not need that. So you need to be knowledgeable on the policies that your company wishes you to run in order for you to apply them. And the third point is that you need to be willing to do it. You need to be willing to do it using the sharing app. RightsWatch fixes those three, or enhances, better said, those three issues just by having a policy-driven way of doing it. So basically, instead of allowing users or having users click on buttons and willing to do so and be knowledgeable and demanding that they're knowledgeable about the policies that the company that you should apply as a member of a company, RightsWatch enables you to do that in an automatic fashion. The second, and we'll address a little bit of that in a nutshell. The second dilemma has to do with the fact that instead of allowing you to use Azure ad hoc rights, RightsWatch also enables you to use Azure RMS templates in a very seamless and comprehensive way for the user. Basically, the user doesn't have to do anything. The user just classifies the email or classifies the document and then shares that document by any other media or any other vehicle, by email, by cloud-based drive, by whatever, in order to allow that sharing to happen. And that's the third point exactly, which is to say it's not just the sharing of that information via email as an attachment to an email, but it's also the way that you have using RightsWatch to do it via any cloud-based drive, USB stick, SharePoint, Content Manager, you name it, whatever vehicle and media that you choose to apply to share that information with. So the point here I emphasize again is the fact that you are able with RightsWatch to seamlessly use Azure RMS templates and not just Azure ad hoc rights to share that information with those external users. So hence, what you're automatically saying is that you're applying a policy-driven approach to it and not just a user-driven approach. So basically, if you want to enforce your users to follow corporate policy, you use RightsWatch on top of Azure RMS and Azure AD in order to make it happen, in order to allow those users to just classify the file. They don't know which policy should be applied. RightsWatch will do it for them. They don't know if policies should be applied. RightsWatch will do it for them. They don't need to be willing to do it because RightsWatch will do it for them anyhow, and they can override that choice, that policy-driven choice, but by signing disclaimers for non-repudiation or anything like that. For those of you that actually already understand the RightsWatch workflow, there's also a couple of other interesting aspects that RightsWatch enables on top of the native enhancers of Azure RMS and Azure AD to allow those external users to collaborate amongst themselves, which is the ability to identify which information is sensitive in nature via a very strong policy-driven content, context, and metadata-aware rule engine. So basically, instead of the user deciding on its own which files should he be protecting before sharing, RightsWatch will do it for him without asking him to make that decision. Not only that, instead of asking the user to apply viewer, reviewer, co-author, or anything like that, which he can, of course, but you will have the ability to apply those Azure RMS templates and following and applying corporate policy, but also enable you to do those Azure RMS templates whenever you're sharing information with those external users. So it enables you to apply those Azure RMS templates, enables you to identify which information is sensitive, and enables you to protect that information via email, via any other media. And we're talking really about not just emails, not just Office documents, but any other file format that you can think of. Other things that RightsWatch enables you to do is to classify, mark, and tag the emails when you're sharing those. So it's not just protecting them with the RMS policies and control policies and access policies. It's also the watermarking, the dynamic watermarking, the fingerprinting, so that you can decrease corporate liability just because you're adding elements. You're structuring typically unstructured information so that other systems, so that other users, whomever that is accessing those files, will reason better over those files. It does not require those external users, so again, users that are not known, do not belong to your company, to own any RightsWatch license. They don't need to deploy any RightsWatch software, nor do they need to own or do you need to manage a username and a password for them. So because we're really leveraging Azure AD, everything is taken care in the background by the Azure authentication mechanisms of the Azure RMS account. There's a process of logging user actions so that into a SQL database, so that you can really then understand who was the user that did what, when, and how, with which file and which sensitive data. And you can use that and leverage that for audit trail capabilities and for forensic analysis purposes. So let's talk about a use case, and this is really the juice of this presentation. You have, a user which name, I don't know, just for example, it's going to be Paul Brown in company Y, and this company is involved in an M&A project. This company, this user needs to share information with, John Doe, which is the bank or represents the bank doing due diligence, and also a law firm. In this case, represented by this other gentleman here, John Smith. So the requirement here is for company Y, in this case Paul Brown, to share information with John Doe back and forward. He also needs to share information with John Smith back and forward, but there's a nuance here. The nuance is that, John Doe and John Smith, they cannot share information amongst themselves. And this is key because you need to make sure that the flow of information is between A to B and A to C and not between B to C. By doing the RightsWatch, by applying RightsWatch on top of Azure RMS, you're really applying corporate policy and Azure RMS templates, mandating that Paul can talk to John and John can talk to Paul, and Paul can talk to John Smith and John Smith can talk to Paul, but both Johns, they cannot talk to each other. If you're using the standard Azure RMS ad hoc rights for that, there might be cases in which that is not possible. Not only that, you're doing it in a way that for the user to understand, for the workflow, for the user experience, because the built-in user experience of RightsWatch is ever present, the user doesn't need to go through any complex workflow or any pop-ups over pop-ups and combo boxes in order to choose to apply an RMS protection. So again, the user, in this case Paul Brown, doesn't need to be aware of any workflow because the workflow is presented to him. It's very straightforward, and with RightsWatch, what we usually say, that it really provides a zero extra click environment. Paul Brown doesn't need to be knowledgeable about the policies that he should be applying when sharing information with John Doe or with John Smith, because, by definition, RightsWatch will apply the appropriate policies that should be applied to whatever files that he needs to be sharing with John Doe or John Smith. And again, we're not just talking about, office documents. We're also talking about the body of an email. We're also talking about any other file type that you can think of for that reason. And the third point is that RightsWatch doesn't demand Paul Brown to be willing to do it. So he doesn't need to be aware of the workflow. He doesn't need to be knowledgeable of the policies, nor does he need to be willing to do it, because RightsWatch fixes all those problems for him. Because RightsWatch has a very powerful rule engine that is based on content analysis, context analysis, and metadata aware capabilities. Whatever Paul is sharing with John Doe can be automatically protected according to corporate policy without even asking Paul to do anything for it. One other interesting aspect of this use case is that, Paul is running RightsWatch. He's running RightsWatch on his workstation. His company is running RightsWatch on a cloud environment, whatever, from an infrastructural standpoint. So policies are being set, are being pushed and enforced on Paul's desktop and laptops and mobile phones, etc., in order for this to happen. But again, the bank of John Doe prevents him from installing any other third-party software out there. And the same thing goes for the law firm from John Smith. So another requirement is that they must not deploy or must not need to deploy any, RightsWatch software or third-party software. All they have, it's basically Outlook, it's their Office applications, and if they want to go even further from a mobile standpoint, they can even use, the apps of Microsoft for Outlook for Android and iOS, and the Office for Android and iOS, and even the sharing app on those mobile devices in order to enable them to consume, to open the files that are sent to them if they want to open them on their mobile device. So there's no point taken. There's no RightsWatch software that needs to be deployed or that must be deployed on those users' desktops. Not only that, but their organizations, their enterprises tells them, look, I don't care how you want to share, with information with company Y. Whatever you do, it must not cost me anything. The company of John Doe says. So basically, they must not expend any money in doing this. So there's no licensing of RightsWatch that needs to happen. In fact, there's the only thing that John Doe needs to have and John Smith needs to have is an Azure RMS account. And there are free versions of that Azure RMS account out there. So the same thing goes with law firm and from John Smith. Again, enable a company that is involved in an M&A project to exchange information with John Doe and John Smith back and forward, preventing them, both Johns, to speak to each other and to share that sensitive information amongst themselves, making sure that both Johns don't have to deploy any software, don't have to incur in any extra cost in order to make this happen. This is really one of the use cases that you're able to apply here in this case. The only thing you need to be doing is to onboard, so to speak, to provision those both Johns, John Doe's and John Smith, into RightsWatch. And the provisioning here, really, it means an email. It's not a username and a password. It's not adding people to ADs or anything like that. What we want is, what is the email domain address? What is the corporate email address that John Doe registered himself to have an Azure RMS account? That's all we need. That's all RightsWatch needs in order to make this thing happen. So there's no complex username and password management systems here. There's no multi-factor authentication mechanisms behind this. Why? Because everything is managed and operated by the Azure RMS capabilities in the background. The last slide that I have to show you, even before we go to the 5 minutes of Q&A sessions that are dedicated to this, is really to emphasize the requirements for this to happen. The only thing that both Johns need to have, as I've said, is an Azure RMS account. And by the way, there are corporate versions of that Azure RMS account, that there are free versions of that Azure RMS account to start with. The only thing needed is to associate the email address that was used to register and to create the Azure RMS account, and for that email address to be provisioned in RightsWATCH. The only thing needed is the email address, nothing else. There's no usernames and passwords or anything like that. That's the only thing needed. And why? Because it's with the email that we identify, that RightsWATCH has identified, that is really John, it is really John Joe, and it's really John Smith, the person that is accessing this document. Again, the complex username and password, everything that has to do with the authentication is managed by the authentication capabilities of Azure and Azure AD and whatever Microsoft has released and made available in that area. RightsWATCH just leverages that to make it even stronger in terms of the exchange capabilities. There is a manual way to provision those users, to add those emails to RightsWATCH. There will be an automatic way to provision those users based on dynamic conditions. A typical example of a dynamic condition, it's basically a company sets up a rule by which every time a user from company Y sends an email to someone at bankx.com, that user to whom that email is being sent to, or to whom or with whom that file is being shared with, is automatically added to the system without any manual overhead from a sysadmin whatsoever. Another thing is what we call post-mortem delivery. Post-mortem is basically when you send an email to John Doe at Bank X, or you share a file with John Doe at Bank X, and that user is not provisioned. That email from that user is not provisioned on RightsWATCH. So basically he tries to open it and he cannot. What happens is that later, the next time he tries to open it after a couple of hours when the process is completely finished, he will be able to open it. Again, all this has to do with the fact that you're able to apply Azure RMS templates to share that file and to share that email. Because if you're using ad hoc writes, that capability is already there via the native Azure RMS offering. And there will be also some time-based provisioning of these users. So they will be inside RightsWATCH with that capability. That email will be provisioned inside RightsWATCH for X amount of days and for X amount of time, depending on whatever policy requires. From a Q&A session that I now open up, I know that there must be some questions out there. I ask one of my colleagues also in the webinar to ask me or to tell me if there are any questions or not. But before that, let me just tell you that this was not intended to be a demonstration of RightsWATCH. But if you do want a demonstration of RightsWATCH and this particular use case, you can send an email to info@watchfulsoftware.com and request a demo so that we can show you this live. Again, this webinar is being recorded. You will have access to it on demand at watchfulsoftware.com.
So, good afternoon to you all. We have a first question from Paul Lunan, and the question is, does sharing also work with applications not extended for RMS, as in an on-premise RMS?
Basically, the sharing, from a consumption standpoint, interesting question, from a consumption standpoint, we're not requiring those external users to deploy any RightsWATCH applications or any RightsWATCH software. So we will trust whatever Microsoft has made available. Microsoft has made several applications RMS aware out there. You have, Outlook, for example. You have the Office application, for example. For PDFs, you have the sharing app. For images, you have the sharing app that can be deployed on your desktops, laptops, even mobiles. You also have the Office application for Android and iOS. You also have the Outlook application for Android and iOS that are, if not already, soon to be RMS aware. So basically the short answer is whatever RMS aware applications Microsoft makes available, all this scenario, all this workflow can leverage it.
Okay, so second question, also from Paul Lunan, is how do you address external users that are not in an organization that doesn't have Azure RMS?
organization that does not have, from a corporate standpoint, Azure RMS, those users can create an Azure RMS for Individuals account, which is a one individual account of Azure RMS. So I'm a user, I'm John Doe at company.com. My company does not have or own or manage an Azure RMS instance, but I need to receive information from Jane Smith from the company with whom I deal with. I just go online, I register in the form free of charge, I give my corporate email address, and that's it. That's all I need. I do it one time, and from that moment on, I have an Azure RMS account. It's called an Azure RMS account for Individuals, and it's free of charge that you can use. Then you can download the applications that Microsoft has made available on several websites to deploy on your desktops, on your Macs, on your Android, on your iOSs, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, third question comes from David, and he's asking how can if an Azure RMS account can be a Gmail or an AOL account.
Not yet, not yet. That's definitely a limitation from Microsoft. Basically, it needs to be a corporate email address. So it needs to be johndoe@company.com. It cannot be johndoe@gmail.com, at least not yet. That's not a limitation from RightsWATCH. It's actually a limitation from the Microsoft Azure infrastructure. I know for a fact that Microsoft is solving this issue. It's a complex issue to solve, and I know for a fact that they are solving these issues. I've been talking to them on this. I do not have a time frame on when this is going to be solved. So the short answer is yes. It must not be a generic email provider. It needs to be a corporate email address.
Okay, one more question from Sander van der Moelen. Could company Y have Azure RMS and simply create extra accounts, therefore company N and X? The reason I ask is because creating a free Azure account requires data that users here in Holland are very reluctant to provide.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So basically, you can have another way of doing it, which is grant those users immediately an account inside your system. The workflow would be different, but there are ways in order to accomplish that. We can take that offline if you want to.
And we have one last question from Paul Lunen. How does this work if the organization does have RMS on-prem but not Azure RMS?
Again, it's the same principle. If the recipient organization is using ADRMS, the individual users can create Azure RMS for Individuals account in order to achieve this and to start the process of also or for that company to also have an Azure RMS instance. But again, if the company doesn't have any RMS, or if the company is running ADRMS, the answer is the same. The individual users will be able to create their own Azure RMS for Individuals account to enable them to receive and to exchange information back and forward to whomever. Again, the process to create that Azure RMS account for individuals is a free of charge process, and it's done one time. The only thing needed is a corporate email address for that to happen. It must not be a Gmail or a Hotmail or an AOL or whatever other free email providers.
At this point, there's no more questions.
Okay, so thank you very much. I mean, the purpose of this session was really a quick 30-minute session in order just to give you an overview of this very complicated, and I stress not, it's really an interesting dilemma, the external users. What RightsWATCH is trying to accomplish with this is to enable those companies that need to share information with external users to also use the Azure RMS templates in order to do so, and to also protect emails and not just documents, to share those files not just as an attachment to emails, but by any other means, and to apply corporate policy in order to do so. Again, not trusting the user to be aware of the workflow in order to do that, not trusting the user to be knowledgeable of the policies, not trusting the user to be willing to do so, because RightsWATCH will do it for you. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. Again, you'll have this available on our website. And if you need any more questions or help, just send us an email at info@watchfulsoftware.com, and we will set up a demo session and show you all this live. Thank you very much.